I read statements like this in plans all the time. We will provide support to the families affected. What kind of support? Who's doing it? What are the boundaries of that? What are we authorized to give? Let's get to the point where we actually go, we're going to make sure every statement in here is a truth-telling statement. Just like your before engines checklist. Right? That we're not just putting stuff in there because somebody put it in a template. These are things that we're doing purposely. They drive us to those compass points that we identified, and we're able to actually execute on those things. All right, questions so far? Doing all right? Cool. All right. What's the difference between a crisis and an emergency in the communications game? There is a huge difference. A crisis is an event that happens that's bad, and you have no ability to control the negative perception about it. You lost that ability because you didn't plan and practice and put resources around you. An emergency, on the other hand, is still a bad event, same bad event, but you drive into it with purpose. You control or mitigate the negative aspects about it. Does that make sense? That's the difference between a crisis and an emergency. We want to live in the emergency space. Emergency response program. Otherwise, a crisis is a bad thing that happens, and then you either by action or inaction make it worse. Let's take a look at one. We live in an unforgiving world, especially in aviation. When bad things happen in aviation, it's not just the press that's on you these days. You're going to be fodder for John Oliver and Jimmy Kimmel and everyone else. And United Airlines became the proverbial whipping boy by having a bad event and then making it worse, turning it into a crisis rather than managing it as an emergency. So I'm just going to let you, just for fun's sake, listen to some of the fun that they had in the late night sector with United Airlines. Now, but then we're going to talk about what really should have happened. How could United have taken that and turned it into an emergency, a manageable event, rather than a crisis? So let's see what our friend Jimmy Kimmel has to say about this thing. All right, but you tell me. So that's what they'll do with your brand if you make this kind of sanitized corporate BS thing that he talked about. What should United Airlines have done?
Not trying to guy off.
Yeah. Now here's what's interesting: is did United employees drag him off?
No.
Who did?
No.
Law enforcement of some, whoever they were. I don't know, but regardless, does that matter? Right? We're in the perception game. All right, like it or not, it's 2018, and we now stand on the edge of a knife. We can either make this a manageable emergency or we can make it a crisis for our organization. The CEO in that case chose to make it a crisis by using words like reaccommodate and just general, and he released a Twitter message, right? That was his way of managing it. What would you have done? What is your advice to that United CEO to move this into a manageable emergency? Agree. Give me some words, though. Give me some words that you would tell him to use. Because, and I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit. This happens in organizations all the time where the CEO goes, this was not us. We didn't do this. Right? This was about a passenger who refused to follow the directions and he should have and blah, blah, blah. Right? But you're going to say to the CEO, what?
Apologize. Take full responsibility.
It doesn't matter whose fault it was. We're in the perception.
After our learnings, we'll do something like we learned our fault, doing this to correct it, it will never happen again.
This is not the United way of doing it. This is not who we are. Get in front of a camera and tackle it and do it. I've got to get in touch with our stakeholders and shareholders. Right? I do have to communicate with these good folks because there's a legal requirement to do so. The media at large, I bet, when you really tackle this in your plan, they're going to be one of the last on the tier of your ladder. For an airline, they're one of the first. We got to get out to the public. Those that are out there in the terminals right now, flying on our airline, we got to get a face on this. Now, what about this social media piece. I see a lot of confusion here by a lot of organizations about social media. There's two perceptions that bother me. One is that if somebody tweets about something or Instagrams something, that you've lost the handle on your communications plan. Do you see? Is that true? If somebody puts a picture and a statement out there, even if it's non-complimentary, have you lost the handle on your communications game?
No.
You can't live that way. You can't perceive it that way. This stuff's going to move faster than you can.
Well, I think
Okay.
you have to mitigate it though. So if
You can't.
you have to have somebody watching the social media because
Awareness is the key.
Yeah, but Air Asiana, that had short in San Francisco, 3 seconds after the airplane came to a stop.
Some plane spotter, yeah.
It was tweeted with a pet selfie. There's no way, even if you're monitoring that, it's gone.
Well, no,
Something's
but I
gone.
mean,
There's no way you can mitigate it.
somebody says something bad about me. If I don't have somebody watching that to go, oh wait, they said something. Oh,
This is out there.
this is out there.
Yeah, data point.
Just to give you a notice, that's not me. It's just letting you know what's out there.
Right, but
Yeah.
then you can mitigate it.
Well,
but
no,
if you don't have somebody that's watching social media within your group, you're not going to know.
You know, the way Twitter works and whatnot is while you're mitigating that person, it's gone up 20 million times.
Right.
Yeah, retweeted and
It's almost like a
recommented.
good point. Yeah.
So it is. I think you're right. You're both saying kind of the same thing. Is you've got to monitor. But what's interesting, if you work for a flight department, here's what I find interesting: is there's a disconnection between the corporate PR folks and the hangar folks. And so, in the initial phases, typically in business aviation, they're probably not going to know who the operator is right out of the gate. If your wheel's up, sure, it's right on the airplane, right? But for most of us, it'll take a few minutes, or even longer to figure out who the actual owner operator is, depending on who you are. And so you may not get those typical trigger words. So everybody back at the corporate house is looking for, Heinz Corporation, and they don't see anything. But what's happening is the accident happens at Vancouver International, and so there's all this stuff about business jet crashes at Vancouver. It's white, it's got a red stripe. There's a registration number out there in the Twitter space. All this stuff's being, sort of happening, but they're not looking for it because those aren't the typical search parameters they look for in their social media space. So they may need your help to kind of go, hey, include in your search these data points, because that eventually is going to come back to us. Monitoring, yes. If you see something taking on a life that's just completely false and could be harmful if it continues, you may have to inject some rationality and fact into the social media space.
Why? I have a question on that point. I use the term "speak with one voice." If you have the NTSB or the whatever state agency running the media plus your public relations, then you have the ability to speak with one voice. But the moment you go onto social media, people like to retweet, add their own comments, people speculate. Do you really want to get in the middle of all that?
Depends on what the thread is, right? Let me give you a for instance.
Okay.
You're a corporate flight department, and there's this thread that's happening that says no one's doing anything. They should be taking care of these people, right? Meanwhile, you're doing those things. You're just doing it quietly. So here's what the NTSB and the TSB have to say about communications. Is their view on it is this: if you could have said it the day before the accident, you can say it now. You can. Doesn't mean you will or you want to, but you can. But you cannot talk about anything that happened from the time that plane hit the ground on, in terms of the weather, the maintenance on the aircraft, et cetera, et cetera. But what's different for you all is a lot of you have a very solid local identity in the communities in which you're based. You are very well known in your community. There's going to be a local expectation of a certain degree of compassion, a face, a presence, and a communication. That's going to be true for a lot of you, especially in the corporate flight department space, right? Let's just take State Farm, for instance. Midwest America, everybody around there knows that they operate planes and knows their CEO because he's known in the community. Something bad happens affecting people that the community knows, and there's absolute silence from those in the community. That's often detrimental. You also have other customers that you may want to get messaging to. The question really is, do you want to go public at large? Probably not. I think this is what you're saying. Purposeful communications is what you really want to get after, right? How do we reach our customer base right now? If you're a big fractional, you're a big charter company, you're going to have to. Because what's going to happen if you don't, what do? They call you and they get a lot of pointed questions. Should I cancel my trip tomorrow? Can you tell me what happened? The NTSB is investigating, or the TSB is investigating. No, wait a second. You want me to put my family on your airplane tomorrow? I need better than that. What happened? What do you got? Am I safe to do that? Sir, and you have to say stuff like this to your customer base. You have to say, we are working closely with the investigative authority. If we believed for a second there was any safety issue, I'd be the one calling you, sir. You have to get personal on this stuff. And when you don't, when you kind of go, I think it could be harmful if you said, hey, let's let these guys do all of it. These guys can't protect your brand. They're not in that business. Nothing against them. That's just not their official capacity. And what they're going to do is they're going to go, we can't draw any conclusions until we complete an investigation. That's great for an investigator. That is not going to work for your customers who are getting ready to put their wives and families and move their business assets on your airplane. They're going to need more than that.
That's not my point. That actually wasn't my point. I'm not saying let the NTSB speak on behalf of the company. All I'm saying is the moment you go on Facebook or whatever those social media platforms are, I think you're opening yourselves up for going down the wrong path or misleading information or jumping on bits of data that people are retweeting or whatever all those terms are. I'm saying you've got your NTSB.
Just social media you're talking about.
Yeah, I think it's fraught with problems if you go down that path. Speak with one voice. You know what? The media is going to be, the television crew is going to be all over. Why not have your PR person in front of the camera and just ignore what's on social media? Aren't you delivering your message in a formal? Hey, we just talked about United Airlines. Should the CEO have got in front of the camera or on Twitter?
Camera.
Or whatever. Camera,
Yeah.
right. That's what you
No
want.
question, yeah.
So ignore all the trash that's on social media, because most of it's probably wrong data anyways, speculative, and get in front of the camera.
Yeah, I think generally.
That's my point. That was
Yeah,
my
I think
point.
generally I agree. Unless you see something that's taking on a viral life that could be harmful, you may make the
The
choice.
moment you respond to that, then you're going to have 10 more responses.
Well, you may, but
And then what do? You stop at that point and go,
well, yeah, I know it's tricky because if you ignore it completely, it gets worse sometimes.
just in front of
Right.
the TV, speak with one voice in front of one media
So,
platform.
and I, if we had 3 days together, we'd walk through it, and we will someday because I have a dream that you'll come. But here's the rub: getting on the camera piece. So let's say we completely go, and then there's valid points to what he's saying, 100%. But if you go the camera route, here's the thing about going on camera if you're not an airline. Airlines kind of have to do it, but for us, you can give the best, polished, concise press statement known to humanity. It's not that. What happens after? It's the Q&A that you don't want to touch. Right? The questions of answer this for me. Now, you'll know how to do it. Especially the folks at Universal, they know how to do it. Don Chuck from the Charlotte Smoking Gun. What is State Farm doing in the business of flying airplanes anyway? Isn't that a job for the airlines? Aren't they certificated and regulated so stuff like this doesn't happen? What are they doing in the airplane business?
They're not in the airplane business.
So answer is your CEO would, right? We're not in the airplane business. Well, but yeah, but
That's got a State Farm logo, or did have a State Farm mark on it.
yeah, it's tricky, right? Because it's the questions that are going to get you. Now you could say, well, we're not going to take questions. Good luck with that. But I will tell you, and I think this is something from a tool standpoint you could do, and this is what Gary Kelly did. Gary Kelly's first Twitter release had a video attached to it. This video had been filmed well in advance of this emergency. I want you to go back and I want you to research this a little bit. His very first one was filmed way ahead of this actual event. How could he do that? Because he used his one voice concept and said, this is the box that we're going to be in every single crisis. This is always safe ground language, right? We are aware of this event. We are dedicating every resource we have. We are assisting the people affected. And as we get more information, I'm going to be right back to you. And that went out very quickly, and it had his face in a suit, and it looked and it felt like he was on it, man. So it's kind of the middle ground of what you're saying. It's he injected, the Southwest PR team injected that into the social space in the midst of all that churn and all that speculation and everything. Because otherwise, Southwest, who, by the way, tweets and does stuff in the social space all the time, but you probably don't. Maybe if you're a charter firm, you do. But there's other tactics you can use, and I found that one to be quite interesting. I do get your point, and I do have to say, and I've seen organizations do it, and it worked against them, where you're trying to go, we're not going to let them get away with that, boom, and then, we rushed that because you're getting pelted by the other trolls out there. I see your point, and some of these things you have to kind of live through in a scenario standpoint, so when you consider your organization, you go, you know what, our best communications moves are going to be here, here, and here because of who we are, because of who our customers are, right? It's hard to give a blanket best practice for all of you, but I can tell you just generally, if there is, because look at CNN and how they report now and everybody else. They'll go, on Twitter, we see this, we see that. They're going to be reporting on live news what's happening on Twitter. So I think if you're completely separated and there's something harmful or detrimental and you've taken no stance on it, it may hurt you. It may.
Just one point, I think, because we're talking about this, it's often easy to think about the accident itself, but a lot of times from a company standpoint, the crisis or the emergency has nothing to do with an accident. In that case, if you have something that's relatively minor, but on the social media side, it's kind of taking up a life of its own. Maybe you're not dragging someone out of a plane and beating them up, but if it's something significant and it's building, it's completely inappropriate to go on in front of a camera. Nobody's going to want the story anyways, and it's something that you can just take care of right away with some facts. But for a smaller company that's not a Fortune 500 or something, to go in front of the media and want to make a statement and release a video on something that has nothing to do with an accident but is pretty significant, it just doesn't make sense.
It may add a whole lot of life to a story that didn't need to be added. Yeah, you have tools, I guess is the point, and what you'll have to do is make smart use of the tools. We didn't have these 20, 15 years ago, these tools to work with. It's sort of an evaluation of each one and kind of which one helps you or supports you the best. It's a great point. In Houston, Texas, a couple months ago, hangar collapse, 6 airplanes in it. Right? Straight line wind event. I didn't even know there was such a thing. But on the social media, they had the owner of the hangar's name all over it. And they had to. But they didn't want to put, to your point, you don't want to go on camera for that. You don't want to introduce the world to your brand over this. We can confirm there was no one in the building. There were no fatalities. Those reports are false. And we're in contact with our insurance company. And they kind of knocked down the story right away. Yeah, it's tools, and you'll have to make a smart evaluation of how best to use them. Yes, sir.
Can I just say that people, you can definitely use it to your advantage too. Carnival Cruise Lines, a few years ago, whenever they had one of them, they went through a real bad spat of people getting sick and all that stuff. And ships broken down. What they did for one of those is they managed their entire emergency response through Twitter. So they drove everything to Twitter. So if you want the latest, go to Twitter. And they managed their entire response, the first 48 hours of it, through Twitter. So it's a way to actually get stuff out and to get a message out as well, and you're not going to get it anywhere else but here.
Yeah.
And even after the Aviation one in San Francisco, I think I read somewhere that the TSB, released for the first time it was like 117 tweets, like official tweets up, throughout those 2 to 3 weeks. So it's become, people are using it as a tool to actually, if you want to get the truth, if you're not the latest, right? We'll have a thing at 1 o'clock, an update, but check Twitter. and to kind of drive everything into that one spot. So
they're tools, right,
That's right.
for you. And what it will take is a communicator in your organization to go, here's my tools, because you all have great points. There's no one in this room that doesn't have a good point. Not used carefully or wisely could really. I'll tell you who did exactly what you're talking about. Is American Airlines got busted wide open about 10 years ago when we were first getting into this sort of social media thing. They had an event with a runway excursion, and right away they took to social media. And there were a lot of snarky comments coming out from people in the terminal and all that sort of stuff. But then, what a great place to work. Look at the fantastic support that American Airlines employees are providing. Look at the degree of professionalism exhibited by American Airlines employees, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it's called seeding. So what American Airlines was doing in their PR department is seeding the social media space undercover with these other accounts saying purposely positive things about their company. It was so overt, and it actually backfired on them and made them look ridiculous because it was so obvious. So it can, not well used, these tools can absolutely backfire on you. I love these kinds of conversations. Man. All right, good. But I'm going to run out of time before I get the hook. Am I getting ready to get the hook?
You guys have that much.
Anybody have the hook? I just want to show you a couple tool stuff because, like I said, everybody talks about what not to do or to do, but I think at some principle level, using a fictional company here called Max Air, it's good to establish for your organization your communication priority. What I mean is, who do you want to talk to first, then next, then next, then next? This particular company, a 135 operator, let's say, perceives that the first thing it ought to do after a critical event is tell everybody at a phone station, anybody manning a public phone number, charter sales, the maintenance phone, whatever's on the website as an accessible point of entry for communication, let the folks at the reception point know something's happened and here's what we expect you to do. After that's done, if there's injuries or fatalities, let's get the families in the loop on the communication. Next, the owner of the actual aircraft. Next, let's get it out to all employees. By the way, side point, if you communicate to all your employees, you've just done a public statement. So don't put anything in there that you're not ready to go out to the world at large because it likely will. Then they want to do one to their customers. Both they have a jet card program and then they have charter customers. And then last, our standard media contacts. The ones that we typically contact when we're starting a new service or whatever. And holding statements are God in communications. These are pre-crafted, pre-approved sets of language that you don't have to run by legal, PR, the chairman's office, etc. before they go out. You've already done that. All you have to do is just put the time, the location, the details in. Does that make sense? So I think step one is set a communication priority for yourself. You'll notice this emergency communications plan has links. So when you click on that, it takes you to that holding statement that or body of communication you're giving to your reception points. When you communicate internally, every time, put at the bottom of your communication, employees are reminded that it is against company policy to discuss, speculate, release pictures or comments, including social media spaces about this event. To do so is a release of company information and is forbidden. You have to remind people of that. Hey mom, hear what happened at work? Right, over Facebook. I'm fine, but we lost an airplane today. That's a release of company information. You couldn't have that communication were it not for that internal info. All right? Make sense? Okay, the biggest points of communication that impact our plan most significantly are in this space here. There ought to be, not ought to be, there has to be congruency between what we're telling our passengers and crew families and what we're saying publicly. Those messages have to be congruent. In the best state of affairs, you have reached out, your team has reached out to the families and started that before you went public with a statement. Here's a detriment of most emergency response plans. There's no consideration of dependencies. Dependencies are this. I'm your PR spokesperson. I have 6 things in my ERP checklist. All right. Number 5 is to release a public statement. I'm so darn good, I got through 1 to 4, and I'm crafting my statement to get it out. The problem is, on the HR checklist, they're still stuck up here. There's 3 families they haven't even been in contact with yet. They can't get a hold of them, right? So I'm working my 6 steps. They're working their 38 steps. There's no dependency that says, oh, by the way, PR person, before you execute on number 6, cross-check with HR and make sure that they've completed item 4, which is the complete notification of all crew and passengers. Otherwise, we just did a public statement. That's how they learn about it. And what do families do when they learn about things publicly? Oh, a couple of things. They call, they drive to your hangar, they show up at the crash site, all of which are non-complementary to our emergency response processes. Okay, and then like we said here, the TSB and the NTSB have pretty clear guidance on what they want you to talk about. You could talk about family assistance all day long. You could talk about how your company is doing all day long. You cannot talk about the this crew, the maintenance history on this aircraft, the weather at the time of the accident, etc. All right, questions so far? We good? All right. I want to show you, to me, the epitome of bad communications in a business aviation space. And I'm hesitant to call out specific operators because it's not fair, but some of them absolutely deserve it. And here's one. The operator involved in this Akron, Ohio accident, which will remain unnamed, executed about every fatal flaw in the communications bit. Not just because they're post-accident stuff, but do you remember this one? These are 2 crew members that were in a verbal altercation all the way to the ground. The SIC was the more senior, PIC was the more junior pilot.
Is that the 700?
Hawker 800, I think.
It was a 125. Let's see.
Yeah, it was a Hawker. Yeah. And they were arguing about an unstabilized non-precision approach and whether it was being done appropriately or not. And instead of the more senior person taking the airplane, saying, I got the airplane, took it right into this apartment complex, killed 9 people on board this airplane, 2 crew members, 7 passengers. A couple of interesting things here. One is, you try to find humor in this business wherever you can, otherwise every day becomes this depressing affair of bad news. So fortunately, the good news is that the occupant who lived in that apartment was not there. He had left just a few minutes ahead of the airplane hitting his apartment. The news, when they arrived, caught this young man coming back from the store and interviewed him. And I'll try to characterize it the best I can. Forgive my rough attempt at it, but the reporter said, sir, did you live there? He's like, yeah. Oh, man. He's like, I just went out to the store to get a Hot Pocket for breakfast, and I come back and, oh, my God. Right? Now, I don't know who the manufacturer is that makes Hot Pockets, but if I was their marketing firm, I'd have been all over that. Continuing to save lives across America. Hot Pocket. Right? But they didn't. But funny stories aside, in business aviation, one of our operational realities is that we have multiple populations engaged in the same physical space. And that was true here. So you had the operator, you had one employee pilot, one contractor pilot. So the contractor belongs to a separate organization. The 7 passengers were from a real estate firm, Peb Enterprises, out of Pensacola, Florida, I think, if memory serves. So now you have a corporate identity that just lost 7 of its executive team. If they have their own emergency plan, an emergency communications plan, I bet they're going to want to engage that. And one of the things we don't look at a lot in business aviation that we really should is board member trips, consolidated customers around a certain organization. Our managed customers most definitely affects them. What I'm getting at, or even like I don't want to use Justin Bieber as a Canadian example, and I don't want to use Mariah Carey as an American example, but you get the point. So a high visibility person probably has a communications team of their own, and the syncing up of that, incongruent messaging can really work against you if you haven't practiced. One of the things I could suggest is bringing your customers in for a safety stand down. Now, I just left Omaha, Nebraska to come here, and that's what happened, is saying, look, you put your faith in us as a charter operator. I want you to know that we don't anticipate ever needing this, but we have thought about it, and we've put intention and resource into it, and here's our thought, here's our strategy, here's our purpose. And it was amazing to me the conversation that ensued from customers that said, my God, we have contingency plans across our whole company for everything from hurricanes to floods to, pandemic outbreaks. We never thought about,
Except for that.
we never thought about our executive group on someone else's airplane. Holy heck, what are you guys going to be saying? What information are you going to be putting out? What mechanisms do you, we have got to get our PR person connected to your communications person. Because if either one of us say something that's at detriment to the other, that could be a big problem. I don't know. You guys tell me. Do you have, those of you that serve customers, are they asking you what if kind of questions? Do they ever bring that to you and say, hey, what's the plan if? And
Not really.
you don't hear it. It's amazing. Isn't that amazing? In today's world, where you turn the TV on and almost every day there's some bad thing happening in some part of the world, they just don't ask those questions. It's a testament to what you do. They feel so confident.
Anymore, it comes to your pocket.
Yeah, true.
But and they have different perceptions. Like my brother's in-law works for a huge freight company, and they had an incident. 3 people get lost in the Middle East in a cargo plane. The whole company freaks out. We got to look after your wife. We got to look after your wife. So, Scott sits there and goes, "What about all the truck drivers? Do we do the same thing for them? Because it has 20 wheels and it's on 95." And he said, it really spun him up because it's all about your perception. That's got wings. Everybody's going to hear about it. Guy gets smoked on the highway, and that happens monthly, right? Weekly, and nobody thinks about.
Well, generally, a lot of transportation companies have their own plan.
No, but the thing is, it's the plane goes in.
There's a precedent you're talking about here.
Yeah.
We don't do this for our truck drivers. This kind of
And he's the guy that has to go to. He goes, wait a minute, I got to go see Jim's wife. But Fred lost it last week. I don't go to see her.
interesting.
And I don't know what they've done with that because that was, when we talked about it, it was about 4 or 5 years ago.
Aren't we a funny species? I mean, for real. The things that affect us and hit us hard and the things that we can drive by almost on a daily basis and just look over and go, oh, wow, glad that wasn't me, and keep right on rolling. Huh. We did a presentation about the difference between aviation and some of our modal surface accident stuff, and we put some stats up there, and this was back in 2002, 538,000 deaths on the highway.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. In aviation, it was one of the lowest years of aviation deaths, something like 28. It was, not even statistically significant. And yet you hear about a plane crash almost instantly, and everybody gravitates toward it, and there's thought of, should you continue to do this? Should I fly on this airline or use this company? But yet, we all drive. We could drive by an auto accident every day. I live in Delaware. It's a daily occurrence. It doesn't faze us. What's the deal with us? I wonder. But that, knowing the perception of the human helps you in the communication piece and go, look, it's never going to be about whose fault it was or wasn't. The fact is this was not normal. People experienced it, and the reaction